Dale here, the chapter goddess. I am a mom, author, blogger, freelancer, podcaster, producer, and overall creative. With this show, I really want to focus on creatives and bring their authentic self to life. How are they motivated to pursue their passions? What have been the struggles along the way? Does self-care play an important role in who they are today and how they connect with the creative flow? Bringing one's authentic self to the forefront is important in this world that we live in currently. Sharing your self-care, your tips, and how you stay on track for things without losing it completely is also important. Self-care is not talked about enough, and authenticity and self-care are what I like to highlight with my creatives, as well as getting to know them. So get ready for a fun and entertaining show. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get ready to meet this episode's guest. Hey guys, happy holiday season. Thank you to those of you joining us today. We have a fantastic guest on the show today. He is a man of many talents and creativity, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into some of his, I'm going to call it fancier creative endeavors. So yeah, but he's also got some amazing work out there, some amazing kids books. One that I'm actually kind of interested in grabbing for my son because it focuses on a lesson of how life kind of can throw you a curveball, but in the end, sometimes it leads you and prepares you to a better thing. But without further ado, and before I completely give all the spoilers away, here's our guest.
Hi, thanks for having me, Madilynn.
Hey, thanks for joining me. So go ahead, introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers. Tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name's Christopher Packard, and I'm an author of a couple books. Lumpy's Gift, the children's book you were just talking about. Thanks for that intro. And Mythical Creatures of Maine, which is where I'm from, Maine. And I'm really into folklore and story. And one of the things I do, aside from writing books, is to tell stories. I'm really into like performance storytelling, and I have costumes that I wear. And the new book that I had came out because it was a story that I was telling and doing for church groups and school groups. And it got some paintings done by my wife and became this book, which is really exciting. I'm also a science teacher, a high school biology teacher. I love to trail run, and I love bringing people together. I organize great big community events in Bangor, where I live, including the largest authors fair ever to be in the state of Maine with 100 authors. And that was just last weekend. So I'm still coming off the high from that.
Yeah. What was that like? Like the feeling and everything behind it. What went into that to kind of bring it together?
Oh, well, the Authors Fair, it was, a lot of work. We started planning, and I was lucky enough. It was my second year. The first year, I just decided to start it. There weren't a lot of events happening, and I wanted to meet other authors because my first book had just come out at the end of the pandemic. And we had like 27 authors at that one. It was great. It was in a church basement. That was great. I kind of threw it together. And I had a long waiting list. And so I talked to everybody, the state writing organization and libraries and publishers, anybody I could connect with, and said, hey, will you support me? And of course, I was nobody then. But then this year, I laid all those foundations. We pulled off a great, modest sized fair that was still a really impressive event.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun for everybody. Got, tons of visitors, and the authors who were there loved it. But I wanted it to be bigger and to bring authors together and have them connect. So we ended up like having like a party the night before where authors and publishers sort of gathered. We did some awards. We produced a charity anthology by 12 Willows Press, which also put out my children's book. And then we had a huge fair, and like 1,600 people came, and it looks seamless when it goes off good. But, there was weeks, like what would amount to weeks of like a regular workday going into there from, the combined efforts of me and a couple of the staff, adding that to their job description. And of course, that's not my job. It's just my passion. And I mean, it's all connected, right? And
Yeah.
everything's a people job. Everything's about relationships and community.
Yes, that is an amazing feat that you accomplished that, and it just like exploded with all those authors and people coming. That is amazing. So, did you get to tell your story orally at this one?
I didn't because I was so involved in organization. So like everybody was like, "Oh, it's so great." I organized programming with other authors and people had a chance to like talk, but I was like working behind the scenes and scrambling around and it was it was really interesting to see how much work goes into things. And I mean, that's not the only I've organized other events as well of similar size and I find they're really rewarding and I get lots of great connections out of them. And I love seeing the addition to the community of these like wonderful events. But, it definitely takes a lot of time. Like I haven't gotten any writing done on my
Yeah.
own projects during that time. Some of my regular patterns were a little disrupted because it just got a little out of hand. And then, you're like, oh, I'm leaving my table where I'm not getting to talk to the author, the
Yeah.
readers or selling the book or whatever, because I'm organizing the events. So, it's really interesting how, when you put yourself out there to create this, sometimes that has its own cost, but, long term, I think that it's well worth it for, the benefit to the community and all the connections that you make. Because, that's why I tell stories. That's why I write books to, bring people together and make them think about who they are and what they want to be and how they want to live.
Ooh, nice. And I am super like, I'm proud of you for doing that, for putting that together, because it does kind of suck to be in that position where you can't really chat with the readers. I've had to kind of tackle a few conventions on my own where I have a booth, and then I'm also on panels, and it's like that time away. It's kind of like a little frustrating, but at the same time can be beneficial. So but I'm curious, when did the oral storytelling start? When did you kind of move into doing that?
Um, hmm. I mean, storytelling has always been sort of part of my family. My family, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, but my family, the Packards are from Maine. If you tried to put your finger in the middle of Maine, that's where we're from. And there's a whole lot of nothing out there. So they were guides, hunters, trappers, ran a resort hotel. And so spinning a yarn and telling a story is still an important way that people hang out. And it can be a real story or a made up story, or sometimes it's hard to tell which one is which even. And so, I grew up like telling my own stories and, like of my life and hearing stories and yarns told by my grandfather and my father. And I guess I really started when I after college, I did a fellowship at Eagle Bluff Environmental Learning Center as a naturalist, an outdoor educator at a great big nature center. And kids would come and we would teach them classes. And part of it, one of the evening programs that we did was there was a guy who was really into storytelling. And he told, some stories that were specific about natural history and some that were like Native American in origin,
Oh,
and some that were like traditional European folk tales. And they all had like a lesson in a way of like teaching people about nature and being a better person. And I watched him and I thought, wow, that is really powerful. And I'd never really thought about like this purposeful storytelling. And so I learned some of those stories that my friend Mike and was telling, and it really kind of went from there. And I just loved how people got so enthralled in being involved in this story and being able to act it out and like emote it and see people's reactions. And it's like this such an authentic experience. It's not like it's like you just get programmed in, like kids like calm down and they're like, they're like glued to it. And it's just magic, because you see that with like TV, but we so rarely see that in our personal interactions. And I just, collected like a little repertoire of stories, and would tell them at church groups. And once I became a teacher in my classroom, or for scout groups when my kids got older and were doing that. And since I've written a book, it really went beyond that. And
Yeah.
now it provided me with, I don't know, it's kind of like a credential where like, oh, this guy is somebody, and I was just kind of doing it as like a thing I would do for friends or groups I was involved in. But now I can go around and actually, perform at festivals. And, I did the Fort Knox Paranormal Festival, and there was like 200 people watching me, and they were enraptured. And it was all these traditional main focals that are about creatures. I'm really into creatures, though I love like all sorts of different types of stories. And that was what my first book was about, which is how I got invited to a paranormal fair, which I also helped to organize,
Oh man,
interestingly. So
that's like a
yeah,
thing for you now, is organizing the fairs.
it really is. But I think I really need to watch out about like my time. And my wife was saying to me the other day, she's like, you're at the point where you've established that you can do these things, and you should pick which ones you want to do, because I see you not doing some of the things that you like to do. You're not going on your runs. You're not, you're not having time to write, and you're a little stressed. So maybe be a little more targeted about it. And so that's my pre-New Year's resolution, and it definitely needs to happen, because I had 3 events that were over 1,000 people in the community, August, October, and now December. And that's way too much, especially being a full-time school teacher. And the one in the fall was just horrible, because I'm trying to get my classroom established and running, and you're just, that's always a big deal. And that's all about relationship too. And you don't want to neglect one thing for the other, and you end up doing everything worse, and then resenting it, and then quitting everything. And that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. That's great advice, though. I feel like I need that advice too. So, oh man.
Yeah, she's pretty wise with that, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's things that echo around, but to hear somebody else say it sometimes can be, especially like directly to you, like I'm watching you, and here's what I see. And she's so tactful, and about putting things, she does this like nonviolent communication that she studies, and it really works. And I wish I was better at it. But anyways.
That's cool though. So how did all of this oral storytelling and everything, how did that lead up to Lumpy's story?
So my church, the Unitarian Universalist Society of Bangor, is a very interesting church. But they have a children's chapel or did at this time, and they still do a little bit, every couple months, where the kids would all come together, and it's got like a really big children's group, and they would come and have like sort of a different version of the church service all together, being as community instead of being broken into age groups. And so I sort of volunteered. My kids were little then, and the person who was running them, her kids were little, and we actually teach at the same high school now. And which is kind of fun. And she said, I really want to do this. Maybe you could help me. And I was like, oh, I'd love to tell some stories. And I told some stories up in the upstairs part of church with the adults before it. And we came up with all these great ideas, and these little stories that we could tell, and these little crafts that they would do, or activities. And sometimes they would be involved, and sometimes they would just, they would always be involved, but sometimes they would be involved in telling the stories as well. And so Lumpy was a story about mindfulness, about being, about generosity and gifts. And so the book is called Lumpy's Gift, and Lumpy is a little lump of clay who is dug up from the ground by a well-meaning potter, and he lives in his nice, dark, happy, wet, moist, and squishy home. And he's dug up and he's put in a hot, dry, bumpy, loud bucket, and he's carried swinging back and forth all the way back to the potter's workshop, and he's put on a wheel and he's pounded and he's shaped and he's pushed on and he's dried, and he's starting to feel not very lumpy. He's starting to feel a little bit crusty, and he's starting to dry out, and he's not really liking it. But then eventually he starts to feel stronger than he ever has before. And he catches a glimpse of himself in the window. And then he gets painted and glazed and fired, and those are hard. And oh no, oh my, he wonders what's going to happen. And then eventually he finds out that he has turned into a beautiful gift. He's been made into this beautiful, beautiful present that can be given to someone else. And he meets other lumps of clay who are now beautiful presents. And he never once wishes that he could go back. And so we told this story, and we talked about how, life, is always making us do these things and taking us out of our comfort zone. And, whether it's practice or school or chores or whatever it is. And we may not like it, but sometimes it brings us somewhere and connected with other people in ways that we could never imagine. And so it was designed to tell that lesson, but it was also a story that was made right around Christmas. And so what we did is we took little polymer clay, actually real clay on the first one, and we shaped our own little ceramic Christmas ornaments or little cups or whatever they wanted to make, little sculptures, anything. And then we dried them, and the religious educator took them and had them fired at a local pottery workshop. And then before Christmas, they had this beautiful little gift that they could give. And so, I was so excited. I got to do this at a conference right at the weekend of my book launch. And there were like 40 kids at this medical symposium about a serious medical disorder that I was doing a workshop at. And all these kids were like affected and, or had family members that were. And so we read the story. I told the story. I told a couple other stories. And then we brought, in this case, because we didn't have a lot of time, we didn't have another week, we shaped it out of polymer clay, like Fimo or Sculpey, which is like a plastic. And we talked about the differences, and they made these beautiful ornaments and cups and sculptures. And then I have a little portable oven, and we bake it, and they would go home with it. And they also got to go home with a book. And it was just so great. And like to see it come from this one little idea that I told this story and like performed it. And then my wife loved it so much, she did these beautiful watercolor paintings. So the next year I could hold those up. And then, we did it a few times, and then it just sort of like went away. And then eventually, actually, in the planning of the book fair, I happened to be talking to a publisher, and he was like, wow, that sounds like a really cool book. Cause I was trying to figure out how to get it published. And yeah, so it came about all because of these connections that I had. And it's really neat how you can't see what the effects of connection and helping people is going to be, and how it's going to open doors later in your life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love that you got to do that and get all of those kids involved to do their own. That's awesome. I love kids' books that have like an activity to do with the kids. And part of that is my mom's also a teacher too. That kind of like comes from her. And then now I'm homeschooling my son, and we get to do a lot of that stuff. It's so fun. That is awesome.
It is. It's all about like touching and then you create like an object, and like who needs more objects, but it becomes this artifact of like this experience that we had. And so it's not like, any other object. It's like a moment in time. It's a moment I shared with my community, and, we took time to, and they all made something for somebody else. Right. And we spent, and that's what it is to be a gift, like turning ourselves into, into something for the community. I mean, of course, like you can't just live for the community. You care for yourself first. But it's just kind of, I don't know. I just love it. I love that kind of connection. And I have other stories, and I have another one that I still do. Actually, the only one that I still do at the church is this one called Apple Chapel. And I have these whole set of stories about apples. And we're really like, Maine is a really major like apple growing state, and apple pressing and cider. And so I have my grandfather's like over 100-year-old apple press that was in his barn, and it's kind of small, so I haul it over and I set it up, and I've done it at scout groups and things like that as well too. So and we grind apples, and we talk about like what it means to be an apple and how apples question who they are, and it's just great. Someday maybe that'll be a book too. So
Yeah, that is really cool. So, what was the difference like in creating this children's story versus all of the folklore that you've put into publication?
Yeah, it's interesting because the folklore and like the way that traditional stories work. I mean, like there's lots of different types of traditional stories, but we have a lot of like moralistic stories that are very, with parables with like a meaning. And so a lot of my stories that I write for telling
Mhm.
tend to be parabolistic where they have a lesson. And I love it when I don't like the blank sheet is horrifying to me. Like write a story and tell it whatever you want. That's like the worst thing somebody can do. If they're like, can you tell a story about mindfulness or generosity or gift giving or apples or community? And I'm like, yeah, I can totally do that. And then and so, there's these common themes, and there's the tropes of like transformation and like the hero's journey, and all of that is ways that have worked for humans to transmit cultural information and work together and bring each other together, and like make sure that values in society get transmitted. And I think a lot about that and about the meaning
Yeah.
of stories. And but it has to be a good story too. Some of the main folk tales that I tell are weird because they don't have middle, they don't have a beginning, middle, and end. They're just like these little snippets or like these descriptions of things. And at first I didn't think they were stories, but everybody assures me that they in fact are stories. And so it is, they're all related. And a lot of times I'll take a traditional story and I'll tweak it a little bit. And
Mhm.
most of these stories were written for oral. They weren't written at all. They were
Yeah.
orally passed down, and
Mhm.
they changed. And in today's society, I'm a science teacher. We're all about like naming, defining, putting things in a box. But
Yes.
like that's not how like human history worked for like up until like 150 years ago, when 200 years ago, when scientific like thinking really became the dominant paradigm. And it's hard, there's nobody who's that old, so we assume that's how people always thought, that things are hard and fast this. But like there isn't one right way. Like a dictionary was invented, like spelling was
Mhm.
invented, and it changes, and there's artifacts in our spellings from old pronunciations and like old languages that blended together. And it's so like I mean, people kind of freak out sometimes and like, that's not the actual traditional story. And I'm like, are you sure? Or are you sure that isn't just like how it's manifesting right now, because it needs to do a thing to bring people together, to convey information. And that's what's really powerful about story. Like it's not some dead crusty artifact. It's like alive and vibrant and storytelling, and it lives inside of me. And when I tell it to people, it lives inside of them, and
Yeah.
hopefully they remember it. So that's I don't know. That's how it relates. Is
Yeah.
humans have been telling stories forever, and that's what we're
That's
supposed to be
true.
doing.
And it's amazing, like, how that has changed from the oral to now it's like on paper and stuff, and just how that's changed in the past. Seeing that, it's been really cool. That's always something that's fascinated me. And just there's so many stories that really have not been written down yet from past like folk tales and everything. And it's so cool just to hear. I feel like it's a special occasion to hear one of those stories that hasn't been written down, that's been passed down from the like family's ancestors, because you're like, oh my gosh, please tell me this. Like, can I write this down? Can I make something off of it? And you're like, no, I really don't want to. Like, the creative brain tries to take over, and you're like, no, this is theirs. Like, it's yeah, it's special. So
Yeah, absolutely. But on the same note, like traditional storytelling, like I mean, And if it's somebody else's culture, obviously you have to
Mhm.
respect that. But in
Yeah.
Maine, like I hold all these stories of like these old guide stories, some of which I got from my grandfather and my father, and some of
Yes.
which, I discovered in research because the stories have died out about these
Oh.
creatures or these cultural figures, and so waking them back up, I think, is valid. But you're right, when you hear something that, like, I love when somebody will tell me like a new creature story, like, and I get to do author events and storytelling, and people come up and be like, have you heard of this one? And usually I have, but sometimes people are like, do you know the Hydronchorhynchus? And I'm like, actually, I don't. Will you tell me about it? And they do, and and they're always like a little tentative. They're like, oh, I'm not going to do it justice. It was my grandfather's story and all that. I did an event in October, and I met somebody. There's a creature in my book. It's called the ding mall, and it was once like this
Ooh.
really. It's like a big cat with like a big thick neck and like stubby little legs,
Ooh.
and it's kind of dangerous because of that big ball on its tail. It doesn't like really eat people, but it'll, like, if you make it mad or like stress it out or even make it too happy, it can do some trouble to you. And so, well-informed guides and woodsmen know how to navigate that, and there's all sorts of signs about them and all that. My grandfather talked about it, but called it by a different name, called it the
No.
Pelton Thumper. And if you go back to like old newspapers from the 1920s and 18 like late 1800s, you'll see all sorts of mentions of this dingmal, and it's just gone. And a lot of the other creatures that were mentioned at the same are still around, like the side-hill gouger and the freshwater tree squeak and all of this. And I still meet all sorts of people that still know that and sometimes tell the stories of those, which are great. But then for the first, like, so I was like, I'm the last person holding a story about this dingmal. It's got a new name, and that's okay. The names change. And almost all the early newspaper accounts say, oh, it was formerly called the Plunkus. Nothing ever writes about it at that, but they all take a moment to say that. And then my grandfather, knows it as the Pelton Thumper and all that. And that's the story I have. But I met somebody who had one of these dingmal stories. And it was,
Ooh.
and like my grandfather was no longer a dangerous creature. It was just one that you just had to know was there. And sometimes it would break trees or you'd hear loud knocking, and that was it. Or, this other person was like, well, it knocks holes into trees for, these other creatures or an owl to live in, or it makes potholes in the old logging roads out in the
Yeah.
woods. And with its tail, and it was just so amazing. We were both so excited to do this, and she let me record her telling the story, and she was just like, it was just so cool. And so I know exactly what you mean, and it's like such a gem out there, and like those
Yes.
types of intangible things are really the most valuable things that are out there. I mean, I'll take a great story over $100 bill any
Yeah.
day. Well, I guess sometimes, I guess it depends.
Yeah. Because I mean, the story's gonna stick with you. The $100 bill,
I'm gonna
not
spend it.
so much.
Yeah,
Especially with inflation right now. It's like, oh, let's go.
right.
You go to the grocery store and you still have to pay extra. So,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
oh man. But those stories, I love them because I actually had someone suggest an idea that I was kind of just percolating in the back of my mind about Dear Woman with because being in Oklahoma, you hear a lot of Native American stories, a lot of Native American history, and I'm like, oh, so I've just kind of constantly been digging into those, and some of them are really cool. Like I didn't even know existed. So I love that you get to explore that and publish that too with your books. Ooh,
Yeah, yeah. It's
cool.
really it's really interesting with the Native Americans. I mean, you have to be really sensitive, as you
Mhm.
mentioned. And Oklahoma is an interesting place because so many nations were pushed into that area, and so you always wonder. I wonder. I don't know anything about Oklahoma, like how that did. I think the Shawnee Nation is out there, and they were in Ohio, where I grew up. That was their traditional land. And but right up the road, there's a Native American reservation nation, I guess. The
Mhm.
Wabanaki, that's the overall cultural group. The Penobscot Nation is right up the road.
Yeah.
So those stories, like those people knew other people, and the stories got traded and got talked about, and it's interesting. But you do have to be sensitive about other people's
Yeah.
cultures. Absolutely. I mean, it's been a rough few hundred years on those cultures for sure. So
Yeah. It has. It's really cool, the different stories, because like you mentioned, everybody was kind of pushed into Oklahoma. There's a lot. And I'm just like, wow. So like everywhere I turn, just having different conversations with people, I'm like, I hear something different, something new, and I'm just like, okay, like I'm gonna just file that away back here and save that for a later day. But yeah. But I am curious because you are a runner and stuff. How does your mental health, how is that affected by what you do? Do you kind of make that a priority? I know you've kind of mentioned being really stressed as of late, but is that kind of something on the agenda moving forward, is to kind of prioritize that more?
It is. It is. It was a bad idea. Certainly not always at my best because a big way that I process sort of my emotions, I think, is physical activity,
Mhm.
and running in particular, like really very long distances, like hours of running. I mean, I don't have to run that far all the time, but some significant portion of time running allows me to, and I don't listen to music. I don't listen to podcasts. It's just me and the road and the feet and the wind. And like
Yes.
we're out here, in the country. I've got a little homestead. And so just being able to work, and our emotions are so tied in with our bodies, I think. And I live in my head a lot, but I need nature and I need movement of my body. And ideally, if I can get those together, I also find that like some of my best ideas percolate up, and I'm like,
Yes.
oh, I don't know how I'm going to resolve this in a story, or I don't know how I'm going to manage this social situation, or how I'm going to like advertise or contact or work this out. And it just like, I don't think about it, but it just bubbles up in those quiet moments that we can provide for ourselves. And so definitely, one of my things is to get back to that. And in my high school classroom, I've do mindful Mondays. So we
Ooh.
do mindfulness through a curriculum written by mindfulschools.org. I've been trained in that, and mindfulness-based stress reduction with Brown University, taking a class with them. And that really informs the way that I work with students. And it pains me to be like, this is really important and it's made a difference. And I'm like, and I am not doing it right now. And it's making me mad. You're frustrated with
Yes.
yourself, but if you just say, okay, well, that's how I'm feeling right now,
Mhm.
then I can be with the students while I'm doing that. And I know that like, even though right now I don't have time, or right now I'm frustrated and feeling pent up, I know that that's like the weather. It's going to change. Like the situation, that's the one thing we can count on, is stuff changing. And so I do practice mindfulness, though I've been horrendous at making enough time for myself to do that in the last 3 or 4 or 5 months, even being off in the summer, just like busy planning things. And I think that was a bad choice. I mean, it was a good choice. Like it
Mhm.
led to who knows what. It's what like I felt called to do. It was the right choice at the time. I don't want to like diss on my past self. Like I made those choices. I
Yeah.
chose, and when that third event showed up, the one in the October, and I was asked to do it, I knew that I shouldn't do it, but I did it anyways. And but it was the right thing to do. It was a wonderful community thing. It was actually really, it was a Halloween event, and we'd had like a big tragedy in the state just a week before, and on the other side of the state, and everything was canceled. Like Halloween was looking like it was going to be canceled. And I'm like, I'm almost like 200, I'm 150 miles away from where this tragedy happens. And some people need to go inwards and be alone during tragic times. And some people need to get out and connect with their community. And so even though all my sponsors were like, cancel this Halloween event, it's not, and we're worried about whatever, I was like, I really think this is something that we need to have in our
Yeah.
community. And I think we handled it perfectly, and it was like the biggest probably the biggest Halloween event in Maine ever. I mean, it was like a witch walk, and so like 550 people dressed up like witches, and we walked through downtown Bangor, and we had a big market, and like there were authors, because I know lots of authors, and there was like people selling stuff, and like 1,000 people came just to like do that or watch the dance and the walk. And it was just, everybody was like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful to be here. I needed to get out. I needed to connect and have this piece of normalness. And, you know, so to be able to have held space for the community in that time, even though there were those that like didn't really, you know, they had some words to say to me about that. I think I was really clear about why I was doing it. And I mean, I wasn't even getting anything out of that event, so other than like the community thing. So it's not like I was after some amount of money or something. I mean, I made note, somebody gave me something for it. That was, you know, they gave me a meditation bowl, actually, like one of those big, you know, and I didn't even know I was getting that. It was just like a thing I wanted to do to help some people out. And so, yeah, you know, and so that's where, I don't know, Spirit led me. And so that's what I did. And Spirit's like, hey, slow down a little bit. Like, you know, what
now it's time to rest.
Yeah, like, you know, make some time. And that's what winter is about too. And a lot of my story is about like connecting with seasons and connecting with the natural rhythms and with community. And so, you know, paying attention to your own lessons is really important sometimes. And it's hard, you know, it's like the carpenter whose house is falling apart but does beautiful work for everyone else. You know? So so self-care, super important and super hard when, you know, you want to do all these things and help people and be there and create opportunity.
Absolutely. I think we're all guilty of that. So I've been really trying to make myself remind myself that winter's a time for like rest. You don't have to try to knock out this entire list of things. Just like breathe for a little bit. So, yeah. But Christopher, we have reached the end of our time. So go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can snag copies of your work and follow you.
Yeah, so both my books are traditionally published, so any bookstore could get them through traditional means. And Mythical Creatures of Maine is by Down East Books, and Lumpy's Gift is by 12 Willows. They're, of course, available on Amazon. I have a website, which is ChristopherPackard.com. And then I'm also all over Facebook and Instagram, and you could follow me there at CS Packard. And I'll see you then. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. And you guys watching, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I do believe I have a link to Christopher's website in the description. If not, I will update it and make sure it's there. But you guys have happy holidays. I think I'm going to be back on maybe once more before Christmas. Not 100% sure, but yeah, stay creative, guys.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to get future notifications when shows come out. Also, be sure to check out my website. I have a blog featuring this creative with some other fun and interesting questions. You can also subscribe to my newsletter there to stay up to date with all things the Chapter Goddess and Madilynn Dale. Once again, thanks for watching and have a great rest of the day.